What's going on, everybody? Nate here with Nuview Trust Company, and today is Wednesday. Time for our Wednesday webinar, our weekly training for you guys out there who are investors of all types, especially for people who are investors that want to use their self-directed IRAs, old 401ks, old retirement accounts, so they can invest in alternative assets completely tax deferred or tax free. Again, my name is Nate Hare. I got a very special guest with me on who I will introduce in a brief moment. But first, I want to thank everybody for continuing to watch, continuing to support Nuview Trust Company in all that we do when it comes to this continuing education that we are putting out there for you guys. This is being broadcast live on Facebook. We also take these recordings and put them on our YouTube channel, our resource page on our website that's getting a revamp. We are in the business to help educate investors because with a self-directed IRA company like Nuview Trust Company, we are only as good as a company as our investors are as investors. So we want people to have all the education they can to make wise investment decisions when it comes to their retirement assets. When it comes to alternative assets, I will tell you one of the most popular investments people make is real estate. People like to use their retirement accounts, old 401ks, IRAs, HSAs, ESAs, and invest those into alternative assets like rental property, multifamily property, land, the list goes on and on. But if you've ever invested in real estate, you realize it can be messy sometimes. Real estate is one of those investments where it can go great and you can make a ton of money. 90% of all millionaires are made through buying real estate or owning real estate, but real estate is not a pretty game. Any real estate investor will tell you that. And sometimes it's good to step away from the home runs we've all hit in real estate and talk about the investments that bombed, the investments that were just horrible to deal with, but that's oftentimes where we lose, yeah, maybe not lose, but where we learn our most valuable lessons. And I got a great speaker here to help with that. So first, just to remind people, what we do here at Nuview Trust Company, first, our topic for today is real estate horror stories. We're going to dive into that. And I've got a horror story of my own. And to remind people who are not familiar with Nuview Trust Company, we are a self-directed IRA custodian based right here in Orlando, or actually north of Orlando in Longwood, Florida. We manage retirement accounts all across the nation. However, we have 11,000 clients and about $2 billion under management. And the management of those assets are all alternative assets. And those are the types of accounts that we hold here at Nuview. We're going to get into that just in a little bit. But I want to remind people that Nuview Trust Company is not a financial advice company. We're not licensed securities brokers trying to sell you guys investments like a Fidelity or Charles Schwab. We are just here to give you good education and act as your custodian by you picking your own investments, you taking control of your retirement account. So everything here is just for education purposes only. I want to introduce our speaker for today and tell you how I met this gentleman. We had a trip out in North Carolina in Charlotte, a great town. I've always been a fan of North Carolina, and specifically Charlotte. It is a growing town, and got to meet probably the best guy or gal, whatever you want to call it, best investor you can meet out there in Charlotte. Through a friend of a friend, he said, hey, if you're going out to Charlotte and you need to meet about real estate, you need to talk to Ed. From the get-go, Ed was more than happy to help without even knowing who I was. We met up, and truth be told, if you're doing anything that's real estate related, you need to know this guy. So a great wealth of knowledge. And one of the things that I really liked about Ed is not only is he an active real estate investor, and he's been doing this for a long time, he also takes the time to educate people who are just interested to learn about real estate. I got to sit there and watch him actually do a little bit of education. And as he was teaching some students or some people that just wanted to gain more knowledge, I thought I got to get this guy on a webinar and start talking about some real estate horror stories, because he was doing a great job talking about what to do in this situation, what to do in that situation. So Ed, are you there? I think you're muted. There you go.
How are you, man? How's the day going? Thanks so much for having us on the discussion with you today.
Yeah, no problem. I'm going to let you take it away because I know you got some great information, but I wanted to just say thank you for joining us all the way out in Charlotte. Technology is a great thing. And I'll jump in afterwards, but you've got some great material. Tell them a little bit about what you do, who you are, your experience, and then jump right into it.
Sure. Nate, it does appear that it's, oh, there we go. I wanted to go ahead and share my screen. and then we can definitely jump into kind of what we're doing. So first, again, thanks for having us on the call. Just to make sure that we're aligned, Nate, can you see my screen? Can you just give me a thumbs up if we're good to go?
I can. Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, guys, today we want to talk about, it's always great, just like poker players, we always want to talk about all of the really, really great hands that we have as real estate investors or as just investors in general. But very rarely do we get to go back and do kind of a post-mortem on deals that have fallen apart or haven't quite gone as well as we would have liked. So over the next little bit of time, I want to spend just walking through a couple of the deals that we've done that just quite didn't go as well as we wanted. And as we've looked at those opportunities with a bit of a post-mortem idea, what are elements that we can improve, or what are steps we should have taken that would have removed some of that risk for us? So those of you who are out there who are thinking about putting some of your funds to work in real estate, I hope that some of these ideas can be a little instructive for your journey. Just to tell you a little bit about, who I am. So I'm generally a long-term buy and hold investor. We also specialize in deals that are creatively financed. So that includes your seller financing, it includes your subject twos, and it includes your lease options. Those are kind of the three creative financing techniques. Certainly you can look into those. I do happen to be licensed in the state of North Carolina. I don't do a lot of business as agency business. That's not really our focus. What we primarily look at doing is pairing capital with opportunities, and those are what we like to do. On the side of all of that, I happen to have recently completed my first triathlon. I happen to enjoy long distance road biking and also quite an avid hiker. You can see I'm a ball cap wearer, so you'll rarely see me without a ball cap on. I happen to have a whole collection of them and wear them pretty often. And of course, I'm a dog owner, so my cat people who happen to be on the line, don't hold that against me. But let's jump right into kind of the opportunities we want to talk about today. I'm going to tell you guys a rule. I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story, and then I'm going to tell you what a learning we might have had from the deal. So what's our first rule? So our first rule is never close without reading all legal documents, including the legal descriptions. So let's talk about what happened on this specific deal. So a seller owned both lots and agreed to sell the property to our company to avoid foreclosure. So they owned the lot. You can see with the red star on it. It might be a little small on your screen, but that's a lot that has some road frontage. And then there's a lot that kind of came around the back of another parcel marked with a blue circle. They also owned that lot. So we purchased the property, and the deeds for the property was recorded. But we made an error, ourselves and our attorney made an error in that we discovered that the deeds did not include the secondary parcel description. So the legal description was only the front lot, the one with the star on it. And that led us to have to come back and do a corrective deed, which also included having the sellers re-sign documents, which is always something we want to avoid because they can get cold feet, or they can change their mind, or they can want to renegotiate the deal, and that often creates a little bit of headache for us in our business. But obviously correcting them now is the right step. So what did we need to do? Corrective deeds need to be drafted and signed, and that's the way that situation had to be resolved. And again, all of this was because we didn't read clearly enough the legal descriptions that described the boundaries of the property that was being transitioned. So again, our rule, never close without reading all legal documents, including the legal descriptions. Even if it seems a little laborious or something to read those, you've got to do it. It's part of being an active real estate investor, or even a passive real estate investor. When you guys are lending on a property, you want to make sure the legal description of what your capital is secured against, that is properly described. And so our solution is, even though some of the boilerplate elements in the legal paperwork we appear to be just boilerplate, appear to be just standardized text, we really need to read through that stuff and make sure that we understand it deeply. So that would be the first rule. I do see some items coming up in chat, guys. So Nate, if there's something specific that jumps out, feel free to stop me. and I'll try and keep an eye on it as well.
Yeah, I'll just say this, Ed, real quick. For people that have questions, type them into the chat box. We'll get to the questions toward the end. And one thing I want to add to what you said there, Ed, is that it's so true that you have to read all legal descriptions and all paperwork. We always like to tell our clients, you have to do your due diligence.
Absolutely.
But you don't have to feel like you're out on an island by yourself. A guy like Ed, for example, is great, and he will share knowledge with you. And from my understanding, Ed, you'll even let people like bring your deals to you and say, hey, look, this is what you got to look at and things like that. So lean on people that have experience. I'm a former baseball player. I make this comparison. I would not be a very good baseball player if I never had a coach, if I never had somebody actually teaching me, showing me the drills and all those type of things. So if you're a beginning investor, this is very, very good information, but don't feel like you have to take all this information and just do all this stuff on your own. Ed's making some very good points, and you can always lean on professionals who have gone through it, especially when you're trying to evaluate your first, your second, third, fourth, whatever, however many deals until you're comfortable with all this.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we broadly recommend, and this is a suggestion for someone, no matter where they are in the US, is there are groups of investors who meet on regular basis, and that, they meet in the form of RIA clubs, and they meet in the form of meetups, and there's Facebook groups. An investor, or especially a startup investor, can learn a lot by simply networking with those people and asking them the question, does this look like a deal that you would do? Like in your business, is this a deal you would do? And that feedback can often be very instructive of how you need to maybe adjust the deal a little bit to make it more balanced.
Such a good point. Such a good point.
Absolutely. See if I can. So our next rule, you learn a lot of things, over years. I've been an investor since 2005, and this actually happened to be my very first real estate investment deal. But you learn a lot over a series of things. And, one of the things I learned was never purchase landlocked properties without a recorded easement. So in this specific transaction, you can see the road frontage there. And then you can see the target property is the one with the red mark on it, the red cross there. And there were 3 parcels that were owned by the previous owner of the same lot I purchased. This home had been a foreclosure. So the bank, the borrower failed to make payments on the property, so the bank took it back. And after a period of time, we came in and purchased the property. So that home, it was listed around $116,000. Now, just for those of you who can be really impressed by a pretty substantial negotiations, we ended up purchasing this home for $28,000. Now, it's not really as much of a home run as that might sound on paper, as we ran into a whole variety of opportunities that we've learned about since. But one of the things that had happened was when we purchased the property, the title insurance that we purchased as part of the closing had guaranteed us access to the property. And it turned out that they had to come and purchase the smallest parcel that's in between the road and this property. And they had to go out and negotiate with, again, the family of the person who had been foreclosed on. So as you can imagine, they weren't very willing to sell even what was relatively a very small piece of property. I think that whole property was about 4 or 6 feet at its widest between the road and the house, but they did have to guarantee us access to the home in some way. And so the title insurance company had to go out and purchase that parcel for $5,000. And that none of that money came out of our pocket. So that was a great case of where monies that we spend on, title insurance policies and our homeowners, just all of these insurance policies, how they're really, really important to protecting our interests in properties. So if the rule is never purchase landlocked properties without a recorded easement, then our solution is we need to ensure that attorneys and other professionals are confirming details of our deals prior to closing. Which brings a kind of related point, which is I see a number of individuals who will meet friends or family and may be interested in doing a deal. I strongly advocate that depending on what state you're in, that you go to your title company or your attorney and make sure that these documents are drawn up by professionals. Even if you guys are very friendly, even if all parties agree on the transaction, you're going to save yourselves a lot of heartache if in the short term you go ahead and make sure it's all documented and recorded properly. So that would be the rule there. Our next opportunity, this is a hard one to learn. This is a hard one to learn. Never, and this may be the most painful story I share with you guys today, just so you know what it is. Again, poker players always want to remember their very best hands, but never want to remember where they really got into a bad deal. And this is a case where I got into a bad deal. But so the rule is never wire money without all documents being completed and recorded. So let me tell you the story of what happened here. We entered into a transaction as a result of a referral from a friend who's a very well-known real estate investor. And so we ended up doing this transaction with kind of a friend of a friend, right? So that certainly helped lower probably the amount of due diligence we should have done on the deal. And we wired $70,000 directly to the seller of this deal in April 2019 as a deposit towards our purchase. Again, we wired it directly to the seller. It wasn't held in escrow. It wasn't any other kind of form of that, but we wired the monies directly to them. And the transaction that we had hoped to enter into in April of 2019 never occurred. And that's kind of a whole long story of why we weren't able to purchase that specific portfolio, but it didn't occur. And so over the next many months, we tried to negotiate with the seller to have a return of our capital, right? And we actually reached 2 different negotiated settlements on them exchanging some equity in kind of the capital being returned, and then also some payment plans that weren't really followed. And so our team was actually without that capital for almost exactly 2 years. So for 2 years, we had $70,000 of our team's money being held, and we were responsible as well for making sure our investors were made whole during that whole time, and they just kind of got to hold the capital. But you know, unfortunately, a truism in investing is sometimes a return of capital is more important than a return on capital. And so at the end of the day, we certainly were satisfied with having the capital at least returned to our team. And you know, the most painful part of probably this whole process is our relationships with our private lenders. We made sure that they were made whole during this whole 2-year period. So if you can imagine what the debt expense may be on something in the neighborhood of $70,000, we made sure that our investors were made whole, and that was kind of what was really burning our business during that time. So the important rule on this one is all funds. This is always true. Every time I don't follow this rule, you end up getting yourself burned. We all think we're Marcus Lemonis, and we're going to break out our checkbook and just write something out. And that's not really how business gets done. So all funds should be sent through an attorney's trust and escrows account, unless you're in a title company state, and then the title company will hold it as opposed to the attorney. But always through an escrow account to protect your interests and their interests. Really, I don't think the sellers ever really appreciated that they were kind of in a bad spot too, and they definitely wanted to get out of it. Maybe me with a little more urgency than them, but.
Ed, let me add something
Sure.
real quick. Is you're hitting all the good points. I just recently recorded. It should be up on our YouTube page soon. Top 10 considerations prior to lending. And if you guys have kind of picked up on what Ed's been saying, not only is he a real estate investor and he's got his own investments and things like that, but he's also putting other people's money to work. He's very familiar with self-directed IRA investing, and most of our clients I know at Nuview are lenders. They like to just leverage the sweat equity and experience of local real estate investors. And Ed's kind of been in the business long enough to where he kind of mentioned that he understands that there's a lot of money sitting in retirement accounts. A lot of it's underutilized. If people want to just invest passively, he's been very good, at putting people's money to work. And he kind of mentioned there, one of the things that I took away is that you always have to take care of your lenders. If things go wrong, one of the things I mentioned in the class is if things go wrong, you still got to make your investors whole. Sometimes it's painful. It's a learning lesson, but as somebody who's borrowing other people's money, for those of you other real estate investors thinking about using private IRA money as capital, is, as soon as you burn an investor, you might not be able to go back to that well ever again, or the well of anybody that they talk to. And there's a lot of real estate groups out there that are very good. There's a ton of money. There's $30 trillion in retirement accounts. So there's enough for everybody. And if you make sure that your investors are whole, you'll continue to have private funding, forever, really. And that's kind of what Ed kind of touched on there.
Right. Yeah. And we've, Nate, and you and I have had some discussions at length. I mean, we've grown our whole real estate business based on the model of building relationships of trust with our private lenders. So if we look across the portfolio, I think we have like 2 traditional, conventional loans, just across the whole thing. Those are more of an exception for us than the rule. I'll just note one thing, from our point of view, being the operational side of kind of this value proposition, the speed at which we can look at opportunities and take advantage of them in the market, when we're working with lenders who have funds to place from their investment accounts, is substantially faster than the traditional model of working through appraisals and underwriting and kind of all of this stuff. And that's why it's really a preferred tool for us.
Yeah, great point. I actually had a conversation with some potential new clients this morning. It's same situation. They had a friend who was a real estate investor. They're buying properties, and I don't know if Charlotte's the same as Orlando, but the action is hot. I mean, if you don't get in fast with a good offer, that property's gone. So most real estate deals, you're not going to bank financing these days unless it's the house that you are living in. If you're a real estate investor trying to pick up properties, it's better to go in there with cash offers or have some private lenders that can get you the money in a couple days. You'll be able to scoop up more property. So, that's a great point.
Yeah. And that's what we're seeing in the market today too, is even if you are looking to have conventional, like we don't generally look for conventional financing on the back end of a purchase, but even if folks are, private lenders can play a very important part of allowing the investor to take down the deal and hold it just until the conventional financing can come in. And we're seeing a lot of our lending partners do that with other real estate investors as well.
Awesome.
So continuing down our journey of these great lessons that Ed has learned, they often are more painful than they may sound as I get to talk about them today. But yet again, cash should never be paid to a seller outside of escrow. In this specific case, we were paying just deposits. So just initial deposits were paid outside of closing. And in fact, we wrote the check. I wrote the check personally. So I go over to the seller's home, and we had been in a dance about the negotiation about the property for probably 2 weeks. And what I was trying to do is create some urgency on the seller to really make a final decision. So I go over to their home, and I sit with the seller and I talk with them for a period of time. And then I pull my checkbook out and I try and, again, Marcus Lemonis them and entice them into sign the contract, to which they did. And then obviously things turned sideways pretty quick. So they took my check and they cashed it on a Thursday. Well, by the Sunday evening, the individual who I was buying the property from begins to claim they didn't understand the deal, and that the language that we had agreed to wasn't complete, and that it didn't capture the essence of what we had agreed to. And in an effort to try and resolve the concern for the seller, we actually offered them, I think, an additional 3 or I think even 4 different solutions, like different ways to structure the deal. So instead of a purchase, we were going to do a land contract, and instead of a land contract, then a lease option, and kind of trying to slide around the rights and privileges in a way that made sense for all parties. And we weren't ever able to come to an agreement. So which we informed the seller, like, hey, that's fine. I think we're maybe we're too far apart on this, but if Mr. or Mrs. Seller, if you're not going to honor the purchase contract, just go ahead and return our deposit to us, and we'll be on our way. We'll go do some different things. To which they refused to return that deposit, and that led us to about 18 months of legal action, where we did what's called a specific performance suit, and that is intending to pursue a seller to honor their end of the contract. And so that's what we were kind of working through there. As an aside, after our experience with this specific deal, I vocally advocate people to avoid these types of suits, and find some other solution. They can certainly be burdensome on the amount of time and effort and energy, as far as for the return. So I think we ended up taking on substantial legal expenses to pursue this case, and we ended up with a property, but we may have been better served by simply going out and looking for some other opportunities. Sometimes principle matters too, but as a pure business decision, we probably would have been better served to go in a different direction. So again, what should we do? We should never allow parties in the transaction to hold any large amount of money from the other side. So that's, sellers shouldn't hold a large amount of buyers' funds, and buyers should not hold large amounts of sellers' funds. Like, if we'll just keep those separate and allow our escrow accounts to kind of serve the need that they have, that's probably the best service of where to go. So again, just a complete rule of thumb is really exchange funds through those escrow accounts, and make sure that your attorneys and title companies are giving you really good advice there. Inclusive, by the way, just like to really bring this to the team at Nuview Trust Company, when you are lending on a deal, that money should often go through the attorney's escrow account as well. And your agent at the escrow office should be waiting until all of the documents are signed before releasing those funds to either the buyer, the borrower, or the proceeds to a seller. And that would be the best protection there. Nate, do you have any insight?
Yeah, you actually took the words right out of my mouth. So one of the cautions or considerations that I mentioned in the top 10 considerations to make before lending money out of your IRA to an investor is how much money you front for the rehab, depending on how big the rehab is. And especially important for you beginning lenders. I know a lot of people like to get into lending because it's easy, less work, less pain and headache, but there is some things you need to take in consideration. And Ed nailed it right on the head, is that depending on the deal, be careful on how much you front the seller. For example, I've seen people do this where it's, a real estate investor needs $70,000 to buy it, $30,000 to rehab it, the ARV is $150,000. The lender, using his IRA, just draws up a note for $100,000, gives them all $100,000, and then something happens to the borrower, right? Maybe they took the money and ran. Maybe life just happened. Maybe the borrower got in a car accident, died. There's things that I've seen in real estate that aren't necessarily where somebody was trying to steal somebody's money, but life happened to somebody. But if you've already loaned out all $100,000 and the rehab hasn't been done, and your IRA ends up taking that house into foreclosure, great, you got the collateral back, but you still got to do the rehab. So now you're in it for $130,000, and after closing costs and realtor fees, now you're breaking even, or you might be in the red. So with Nuview, with your Nuview accounts, just to mention is you don't have to front all the money on a loan. You can do it in partial increment, and that can be handled through us. We almost act as your escrow agent at that time. We can send the $70,000 for the investor to buy it, and then you give us the instructions as to when we send the next set of repairs and the next set of repairs. And what I always like to do is, if I'm loaning to an investor, have them show me evidence of the repairs, the first set of repairs, before I send more money for the next set of repairs. And if they're local, drive out, take a look at it with your borrower. I'm sure you wouldn't mind that at all, Ed, is showing them what their money's doing and showing them at what stage the project's at.
And even first, if you're local, it's a great opportunity for you and so the passive investor and the active investor to really continue to build an understanding of how they work together. So that site visit can be really important. But even if you're not local, we have the most powerful technology in our pockets. And routinely, we'll go and just do a short video on our phone to show our lenders what the project looks like. Often even before we identify a relationship with a lender, they'll receive a video walkthrough of the property.
That's awesome.
Like, and it's not highly produced. Like, this isn't for marketing purposes, but it's so that you understand what the asset looks like, and you can see how we're looking at this and saying, okay, top of the market for this property is 150,000, like you said. Given the current state, it's worth about 70, and we're going to put 30 into it and really get it to where it needs to be. By the way, those draws that you were talking about, so the payment for the work over time, that's very, very customary. And it should be that the active investor can demonstrate how they've used, that maybe you divide it in half. So how they've used the first 15,000 before you extend the second 15.
Yeah, great point. And I'll throw you a bone here too, Ed. For you potential lenders who haven't done this before, working with someone like Ed or a local real estate investor, gives you the opportunity to kind of learn about real estate too, from the outside looking in as a lender. You get to make money on a deal without having to do all the work. But don't get confused. You don't own the property. So don't go in just because, Ed or somebody gives you a tour of the property, gives you video that you can dictate how the cabinet should look and the flooring should be put in. So you're still the lender.
You're still the lender.
Exactly. Yeah. You're still the lender. You're making money on the deal. But as long as you're in constant communication with your borrower, that's a big point that Ed made. But you can control how much you send, in your discussions with the borrower, or again, use an escrow account. We've done that too for Nuview clients, where they'll just dump the money in an escrow account and let escrow dictate when those sets of monies go out to the borrower.
Absolutely. So I have one more rule, and it's less of an experiential, like not a specific deal thing, but just what we've kind of gained some experience around over time. And that's that when you're doing a real estate deal, whether it's with your own funds in your own account or you're lending, there's kind of some guardrails that all parties in the transaction should honor to make sure that the deal produces value. If the deal doesn't produce value, then no one gets to move forward in a way that's productive. And so you always should use capital that is structured specifically for that deal, even if you and say, for example, you're a passive lender to someone like me who's an active investor. Even if in the past you've done a deal and an interest rate you've agreed to is a certain number, the next deal may not support that interest rate or potentially could pay more. And let's just talk about what that may look like for a moment. So when you see a deal, it needs to be structured in the right ways. In regard to a couple of elements. So the rate of the capital needs to be appropriate, or the rate of return on the capital for the lender needs to be appropriate. The amount borrowed needs to be appropriate. The term of the loan needs to be appropriate. So that time period that is borrowed for. The payments, whether there are payments during the term or they're made on the front end or the back end of the deal, those are appropriate. Understanding if there is upside or downside risk that the lender will actually be sensitive to. In most of our deals, our lenders are pure debt lenders. And what that means is I'm taking all of the up and the downside risk on that property. If the property ends up costing me an extra $10,000 to rehab, that's going to come out of my pocket. But then again, the upside on the sale is ours as well. So there's a variety of elements of how you structure a deal. When we don't structure a deal properly, it may limit the exit strategies that you have. Let me just tell you one possible scenario where I'm seeing that these days. So I'm seeing people who are going into communities and creating these really beautiful Airbnb properties. The challenge with that, now they're doing great work, but the challenge with underwriting a property exclusively for Airbnb is often those rental rates are above what's standard for the market. So if some external factor came in and limited the ability to rent an Airbnb or a short-term rental, I guess I'm saying Airbnb, I'm speaking about a specific company instead of the strategy, but if there was a limit to your ability to have a short-term rental by the HOA, by the city, by the county, by the state, all of a sudden the deal that you had made, considering the income that should come from the short-term rental, now doesn't pencil out very well as a long-term hold. And by the way, you may have thousands of dollars worth of furnishings for that home that now you need to remove because someone's going to move in there. So there's definitely ways that the structure can affect what exit strategies you may have. I think in the world of COVID, we've seen a lot of that this year where plans that people had got affected. One of them locally here in Charlotte was last summer, we had expected that the Republican National Convention was going to be here in Charlotte. And as a result, that the need for Airbnbs was going to be substantial. And then because of course, COVID happened and those were canceled, there's a lot of people who went into deals anticipating that income, and now they're having to adjust to not having that income. So there are definitely scenarios where deal structure can limit your exit strategies. The important question, the way that we frame this question when we're talking to our investors about, what amount of the profit on a deal are we able to share, is really this. Look, some deals, and this is the important question, how much can the property afford in debt? Some deals can afford 8% for the debt that they need. Some deals can afford 10%. Some deals can afford 12%, or maybe even greater numbers. But often that rate of return can vary even within the project. So for example, a deal may be able to afford 8% in ongoing payments during the life of the project, where if the borrower chose to take the capital on the back end, the deal may be able to afford a higher return, so maybe a 10% return for the same investment. So even adjusting the term of the payments or the return for the lender can affect how much debt or what the property can afford. And then the last thing, and it's just always really important to mention this, discounts on properties, so buying a property at below market level, can often be synonymous with the amount of risk that I'm taking on. And so a way for passive investors to hear that is, if the deal can afford a higher interest rate, there may be a little more risk in that deal, or there may be less capital chasing that deal, which may push the rate up, right? So kind of some supply and demand dynamics there. But if it's a really safe deal, we probably have a lot of capital that we could place onto it. And as the deal gets a little less safe and there's a little more risk to it, maybe it's a full rehab in an area that's gentrifying. Sometimes the rate of return that we can pay is greater, but there is a little more risk to that deal. An important question one of my investors asks me all the time is, Ed, what's my worst case scenario? What's my worst case? Where's the worst case this deal could go for us? And that gives us a basis to have a very honest conversation about what we're seeing as the risk and the upside in the deal. Nate and I had actually already mentioned what my last, I didn't have a whole slide for it, but extra credit for you guys. There are local meetups in almost every market in the US, and they're happening at least weekly, probably in every major metro in the US. And if you're not attending one of those on some regular basis, just to learn a little bit about this community and what they're doing, I think you guys are missing an opportunity. Many of those meetups are free. Like we host one in Charlotte, it happens to be free. We host an educational hour once a week. It's every Thursday afternoon in our market. Others in other markets do the same thing. And those educational sessions can be very valuable for you as you begin to pencil out the potential on lending in a deal like this. And what's the harm in saying to an investor, hey, I'm probably not the guy or the gal for this deal, but would you mind sending it to me so I can practice underwriting it, so I could see what that would look like? So that's definitely a greatest tip there. And then, again, the learning there is how much debt a deal can afford is important when considering the amount of leverage that is appropriate for the project. So that's my final rule, guys. Use capital that is structured for the deal. I know Nate has another story that he wanted to share with you guys. Wanted to share with you, my contact info. Feel free to reach me at my email address. It's just my full name, edwardpeugh@gmail.com. My telephone number, it's the same number my wife has, 704-310-1280. You can find us on Facebook. My own personal is Edward Peugh, and the companies are on Instagram as well. So Edward Peugh. CLT Buyers is our active real estate business, and we'd love for you guys to follow us there on the journey. And then we have our podcast out there as well. So Nate, thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to share these details. Once again, guys, if any of these contact details are valuable for you, feel free to call us, shoot us a text, email us. We'd be happy to talk about some specifics offline, but this is where you guys can find us.
Yeah, and stick with us because I'm gonna go over one case study that has to do with IRAs that
Awesome.
blends perfectly with what Ed mentioned, and we'll take some questions if anybody has questions at the end there. Also, Ed will be posting his contact information in the chat on our Facebook Live, so you can always revert back to that. And remember, this is recorded, and it's going to be out there on our YouTube page forever, so you can always revert back to that as well. But if you took a screenshot, bam, you're good to go. So Ed brought up a lot of great points that actually mesh really well with the horror story I have from an actual IRA client many years back, actually. Let me see. There we go. So let me just circle back just for a second and just remind people the type of accounts that can be self-directed. If you plan to be a lender and you want to lend your money passively into local real estate investors deals, we've got 7 types of plans that you can set up here. All have their special tax benefits. But remember, these plans can also invest in other alternative assets. Maybe you are the one that actually finds the rental property, the commercial property, the land, and you want to own it in a tax deferred manner or tax exempt manner. These are the plans that Nuview has for you. And the more you use these plans, the less Uncle Sam will take out of your profit. So just always remember that we've got 7 types of plans that offer you tax benefits when we're talking about alternative investments. And when we talk about alternative investments, what are we talking about? We're obviously talking about real estate. We're talking about notes. And my case study actually starts as a note, but ends up being real estate. We'll see where the headaches are in that. You can invest in private stock, private entity investments, and much, much more. The IRS actually doesn't limit us as to what we're allowed to invest in. With our IRAs or 401ks, the list is real short. No life insurance contracts, no collectibles. Those are the only 2 investments that aren't allowed in your HSAs, IRAs, 401ks. Anything else is fair game. So we hold alternative assets here at Nuview. If you want to hold traditional assets, that's when you have an IRA at Fidelity or Charles Schwab. So my horror story has 3 characters to it, and we'll just call them Mr. Do Little, Mr. Do Wrong, Mr. Do Right. I did not create these characters, and it's interesting, Maggie, how Mr. Doolittle looks eerily similar to me. Are you trying to say something there with that? Okay, yeah, sure, okay. All right, so this horror story has 3 characters, and this is a real story, guys. I didn't want to give the real names. And this is an actual client that actually used his IRA to do a loan, actually 2 loans, to the same investor. He had taken some classes to make sure that he understood the considerations before lending. And really how he came to be is he wanted to start in real estate. He had just retired. He had about $180,000, $200,000 in his retirement. He knew that if he didn't invest it wisely, he was just going to liquidate that and it would be gone pretty quickly since he didn't have any earned income in retirement. So he wanted to invest it, and he actually wanted to become a real estate investor. He wanted to invest it into real estate, found out that real estate has a lot of moving parts, and the best way to learn real estate is to invest passively first. So he did a lot of the things right. When you look at our considerations and a lot of our education online, there's a lot of things that Mr. Doolittle did right. He came to an event, found a local real estate investor. The local real estate investor pitched him 2 deals. One of the cautions I will say in this story that Mr. Doolittle did not abide by is make sure that you do your due diligence on the person that you're doing business with. Make sure that you're not loaning money the first time you hear a deal. Make sure you take a little bit of time to analyze it, maybe run it past another investor, maybe even run it past, hey, have you done any loans with this guy or done any deals with this guy? That's the one thing Mr. Doolittle did not do in this story at the beginning, but everything else he did right. He took his IRA. He decided he wanted to make 2 loans to this real estate investor. He did his due diligence on the properties. Both were good properties. He had his attorney, a lender's attorney, draft the promissory notes for his IRA so that they were secured with a note and a deed of trust on both of these properties. He closed at a title company and got all the paperwork that we needed to fund the deal. And he then owned 2 promissory notes secured by real estate in his IRA. Now, here's where Mr. Doolittle got it wrong. He just assumed now that he had those investments that he didn't have to do anything anymore, that the job was done. And that's so far from the truth. When you are a lender, you have to think like a lender. We use your IRA like a bank. You got to think like a bank. Banks make sure payments come in monthly. Banks make sure property taxes are paid. Banks make sure that homeowners insurance is on the property. And these are some of the things that Mr. Doolittle did not do. And he definitely didn't do his due diligence on the person. Okay. Be careful when you are going out and networking at these events. I will second and mirror what Ed said, is that you meet a lot of phenomenal real estate investors through a lot of your real estate investor groups, especially live. If you're going live and you see people, you gain kind of a knowledge of who is out there in the market, who's active. But especially with a lot of the online stuff today, be careful who you're talking to. Make sure that if you're going to loan your hard-earned retirement money, that you understand who that person is on the receiving end. The good thing is, if you do it right, you always have the property as your collateral, but there can be a lot of headaches if the person isn't somebody that should be the one managing your money on these types of deals. And this was the type of person that he ended up doing business with, and we'll just call this person Mr. Do Wrong. So what happened is as soon as they closed on these properties, okay, Mr. Doolittle did nothing to make sure that Mr. Do Wrong made payments. Mr. Do Wrong, as soon as the deals got closed, came up with all sorts of excuses. I need to find renters before I can make you payments. I was in the hospital. My mom died. My cat died. My phone died. These are all real excuses that the borrower gave to Mr. Doolittle. But Mr. Doolittle, hence the name, did nothing when it came to the payments. The note specifically said that the borrower would make monthly payments, and it's really up to you as the lender to make sure that they do. Nuview is not in the business to be a collection company, but we will do anything that you ask us to do. One of the things Mr. Doolittle should have done in this case is have an attorney or have somebody draft a letter of a notice of default, right? Notice of default. I notice you missed a payment. Mr. Borrower, please make the payment in X amount of time, or I will proceed with the foreclosure process. Mr. Doolittle did none of this, however, and this went on for quite a while. Actually, it went on for 2.5 years. 2.5 years, Mr. Doolittle's IRAs received no payments from Mr. Do Wrong. And again, Mr. Doolittle did absolutely nothing. Okay. So Mr. Doolittle, after about 2.5 years, is still communicating with Mr. Do Wrong, who says, yeah, I just got continuous problems. And you know what, Mr. Doolittle, I'm not going to be able to make payments on these loans. I'm sorry for all the hassle that I put you through. But the good thing is, you've got these properties, your collateral is these properties. So we're going to make something happen, and you don't have to keep hunting me down. I'm going to give you a deed in lieu of foreclosure. So just so you guys know what a deed in lieu of foreclosure is, it's basically where a borrower turns over the property, turns over the keys and says, you don't need to foreclose on me. We don't need to go through the court process. Here are your properties back. You can have them. Well, when that happens, what you also get with the properties are any liens that have been built on those properties, HOA liens, tax liens, any headaches that are unforeseen now are inherited by you, and you hadn't gone through the proper foreclosure process. So definitely want to make sure, consult with an attorney before you offer a deed in lieu of foreclosure. Good thing is he gets the properties back. Bad thing is, he finds out later down the road that the property taxes had not been paid on these properties for over 2 years, and he's got bigger problems coming down for him down the road. So now that the properties are actually owned in the name of the IRA, because remember, Mr. Doolittle started with ownership of just notes. Okay. Now that he's got the deed in lieu of foreclosure, the ownership changes hands and changes from Mr. Do Wrong's name or LLC's name to the name of his Nuview account. So Nuview Trust Company, FBO, his traditional IRA, now owns those two properties, and we help with that type of paperwork. But this is really the first time that Nuview gets notifications that something's wrong with this investment. Remember, when he's in the lender's position, he has to make sure that notice of defaults go out and things like that. So just because payments don't come into the IRAs, we have no idea what the relationship or the agreement is between you and the borrower. We're not going to step in at that point. But once the property now changes ownership and now the IRA owns the properties, well, the mailing address gets changed to our address, and now we get notifications that the property taxes have not been paid, and this is going to tax foreclosure. So we immediately call Mr. Doolittle and say, are you aware that this is going to tax foreclosure? And Mr. Doolittle says, don't worry about it. Mr. Do Wrong told me everything would be fine. Okay. Lo and behold, Mr. Durong was not making sure everything would be fine. So after a few weeks, we call and a concerned IRA specialist calls Mr. Doolittle and says, we got to go through some possible solutions because you might be at risk of losing these properties to tax foreclosure. Okay. We finally shake the tree a little bit and Mr. Doolittle realizes that he's got to do something or else he's at risk at losing his entire IRA through a tax foreclosure. Okay. He's got the properties, but he's got taxes due on that. So in a situation like this, a little education piece for you is we would go through a series of questions because here's the interesting part. Mr. Doolittle had 2 properties now owned in his IRA, but he hadn't received an interest payment in over 2 years. Remember, he retired before he did this. So he doesn't have any earned income. He can't make contributions to his IRA and he has no other IRAs out there. There's no IRA at Fidelity. There's no IRA at Charles Schwab. Okay. Why that's important is because we have to pay property taxes or these properties are going to tax foreclosure. He has no cash liquid in the account. He has no way to make contributions because he has no earned income. Okay. So what he could do is he could take a distribution of the asset and try to deal with it on his own, but that's going to take time. So usually an IRA specialist will go through a list of questions. Have you made your annual contribution? In this case, no, he can't because he doesn't have earned income. Do you have any other IRAs? He doesn't have any of that. Do you have any earned income? He's retired. He doesn't have that. So he was really between a rock and a hard place, and we didn't have much time to save this investment. So the good thing for Mr. Doolittle is we did have an event coming up. Okay, we've actually got an event coming up the end of this month if anybody's interested and they're in the area of Orlando. Okay, and the concerned IRA specialist said, well, we can't give you tax, legal, or investment advice, but we can invite you to one of our events, which is a networking event that Nuview hosts. We often host these events. We'll be getting back to them quarterly. And it's a good segue because we've got one coming up June 23rd. For anyone who's interested, I'll have more information on that. But this was back many years ago and we had an event coming up. It was actually that evening. And the IRA specialist actually invites Mr. Doolittle and says, why don't you come to the event? I would highly urge you to come to the event and meet some local investors. Maybe they can help you. So Mr. Doolittle comes to the event and he meets another Nuview client. Okay, we'll call this person Mr. Do Right. Mr. Do Right's a local real estate investor. He's got an IRA with Nuview. He also knows a lot of other clients at Nuview as well. Mr. Do Right offers to help Mr. Doolittle and they figure out a few things. First, they discover that Mr. Doolittle never even took a drive out to the properties. These properties were right here in his own territory. He had not even bothered in 2.5 years to take a look at these houses. He had no idea if there was insurance on them. He really had no idea because he hadn't taken the time to continue up with this investment after he funded it and closed with the title company. So the very next day, Mr. Doolittle and Mr. Do Right go take a look at the property. They find out, yes, indeed, there's no insurance on the properties. One property had a fire in the kitchen and needed some pretty major repairs. One property had renters and needed minor repairs. And let me repeat that. One property had renters. So Mr. Durong the whole time actually had renters in both properties and he was just pocketing the rents. Again, something you got to consider. Make sure you do your due diligence on any investors that you do business with. The properties were, of course, back on taxes, and Mr. Doolittle doesn't have enough cash in the IRA to fix it. So here's the solution that they came up with. Okay, Mr. Do Right said, well, I'm a local real estate investor. I'd like to buy one of the properties, and I'll buy the property with the burnt kitchen because I like to fix up properties. Obviously, I'm not going to pay retail for this since I'm helping you out. We'll work out a deal where I can buy it at a good price. But what that does is that allows there to be money put into Mr. Doolittle's IRA through the sale of one of the properties. And here's the most interesting thing about it that I love. Mr. Do Right borrowed money from another Nuview client to fund the deal. Why? They needed the money in 2 days. They needed to fund fast. So Mr. Do Right personally borrowed money from another IRA client who loaned him the money to buy the property with the burnt kitchen from Mr. Doolittle's IRA. That immediately put cash in Mr. Doolittle's IRA, and we were able to pay the property taxes right away after the sale of that property. So with the help of the investor, him networking at the local networking event, he was able to save his retirement. Later that year, he got a property manager to rent the property out, And he started actually for the first time in 3 years, start getting income to his IRA. And he kept one of the properties there as a cash flowing property in his IRA that now grows completely tax deferred or tax free. One thing I will mention, he started with about $180,000 out loaned on 2 properties. He didn't. Now you can make the argument he didn't receive any payments over that 2-3 year period. But here's the interesting thing is, because it was real estate and because over the 3 years, the properties had appreciated and they were actually in a good area, the property he ended up keeping was about $180,000. So after all of that, after all the just sweeping things under the rug and pretending like things weren't happening, he actually didn't lose $1 in value to his IRA. And now going forward, he actually has positive rental income in that. If you look at the stock market and crypto, how little has to be done for you to lose 30% in a day now, especially with crypto. Elon Musk can go online and make one tweet and your portfolio drops 30%. You can see how real estate, because it's tangible, because it's the largest segment of our economy, because people always need homes to rent or buy, real estate's, in my opinion, one of the safest investments that will continue to grow. And it kind of shows here, even though Mr. Doolittle did all the things that you don't want to do, he ended up saving his retirement with the help of another client, another IRA. So we were able to save Mr. Doolittle's retirement, but that is a good horror story turned right. And some of the things you definitely don't want to do, and then some of the ways that you can fix problems, and some lessons as to if you ever become illiquid in your IRA and you have to fix things, based on how much time you have, can you make a contribution and put money into the account that way? Can you transfer some money in, roll an old 401k over? And there are actually, and I've got the last week's topic, we talked about IRAs that can actually receive loans, or banks that will have institutional loans for IRAs. This wasn't something that Mr. Doolittle could have done because he had such a short time frame. But if you're ever using your IRA to buy a property and you're illiquid and you need to finish up the rehab, there's banks that have loans that they will give to your IRA that are non-recourse, meaning they're not recourse to you, the person, they're only recourse to the property. And understanding all of this through some of the Nuview education will help you become a better investor with your retirement account. So little lesson there. I think it blended well with Ed's information, and we'll go ahead and start taking some questions. If anybody's got questions, let me see. Why don't you go ahead and pop that up, Maggie? See if anybody's got questions. Ed, anything you want to add to that while we're pulling that up?
No, I definitely can appreciate how a couple of series of missteps created what could have been a really dangerous situation for your client.
Yeah, and it's good that we had that back. While we're pulling questions up, is there any, you're in Charlotte, right? And you didn't mention it too much, but I want to kind of highlight it because I don't think people realize that you are a member or moderator of the largest online real estate group. Is that right?
Yeah, we have, I think, just over 12,000 members, specifically focused on the Charlotte, North Carolina, and surrounding markets. And it's a great resource for deals. I mean, deals are routinely posted there. It's a great resource for contractors and recommendations, and even, questions about, hey, someone will send a picture of their plumbing maybe and say, hey, guys, what do I need to look out for to make sure we're meeting codes? And it's just kind of a big message board for us all to engage with each other.
Yeah, and it's really active. So what are some of the things that, if somebody joins that, what are some of the common things that people post on there?
Yeah, I mean, we use it even just today. We used it. We need to have some anchors actually placed in this wall behind me. So just trade skills and things like that. When we're looking for deals, even sometimes, yeah, when we're looking for some short-term capital or things, those are all items that are placed in that specific Facebook group. So that Facebook group is the Charlotte Real Estate Investors Facebook group. You'll see that it has about 12,000 members in it. And for those who are interested in what's becoming one of the premier cities in the Southeast US, Charlotte's a very powerful driver of our economy here, and routinely listed on the top 5, top 4 lists of cities where these young business professionals are coming. There's a new Wake Forest School of Medicine coming. Apple's just moved, announced they're coming to, I think, Raleigh. So there's just a lot of really great things that are happening that are contributing. Mr. Tepper, his purchase of the Panthers and now an MLS team. There's just a lot of really positive growth things that are happening in the Charlotte market in the next 10 to 15 years.
Yeah. Here's a question. If somebody from out of state wanted to do a loan in North Carolina, are there any things that they need to consider being out of state?
No, no dangers for that. As far as, I mean, a good portion of our lenders are out of places other than North Carolina. So they're, out of California or out of Florida, some are in Texas. And so that's all pretty straightforward. They need to check with their CPA about how they claim that income, but there's no special paperwork that gives them a specific right. They don't have to create any single purpose entities or anything like that.
Yeah, and perfect. You said that, because if they're using their IRA, they don't need a CPA because there's no income to report, which again, it's the great thing to using your IRA as a passive investment tool. Just talked to a potential client this morning. They want to start getting into it. We talked about the different types of accounts that they can use to fund out of. And they ended up realizing that they could probably use 5 or 6 different accounts, IRAs, HSAs, ESAs for their kids, and start making contributions to those plans because they have access to deals now through a local real estate investor. And that's one of the most powerful things. It's not just merely being able to set up these tax advantaged accounts that we have it here at Nuview, but having access to deals. So a lot of people get confused. They think they need the deal. No, you just need access to deals. And access to deals can just be, an online resource, kind of how Ed mentioned, or just knowing Ed. Here's a question that just came in. What are the minimum dollars needed to lend through some of your deals, Ed?
Yeah, and this is an important question, and it's important to frame it in that we have investment opportunities that come through our business that range from as little as maybe $30,000, and then we just had a partner who funded, I think, $305,000 just last week out of her individual account. And so there's a wide variety of opportunities on that spectrum. For sure, if the capital is a little greater than, say, the $40,000 or $60,000, the number of opportunities that a passive investor may be able to consider are a larger number. But we can certainly find ways to also identify opportunities for those who may have a little less capital, at least to begin with. One powerful thing, and I don't think we've explicitly said on this call, but there may be opportunities for actual private lenders to partner to bring together the full complete amount of capital needed for an opportunity. So you were talking about the live event that you guys are having. Attending either a live or virtual event is a great opportunity to meet other investors who may have some capital placed together. And then those two individuals use their funds that you guys are custodians of to make the investment together. And so those are opportunities. There is a little bit of restrictions around prohibitive transactions, but for sure, any two arm's length people are generally allowed to do deals together. Yeah,
great point. And again, using your resources, using what you have at hand. I would say almost 50% of the assets that we hold are what we call split assets. Split assets mean it's just partnered with one IRA and something else. Usually it's another IRA. And sometimes it's someone's IRA and someone else's IRA. It could be a brother's IRA, a sister's IRA, uncle's IRA. If you really step back and think about it, you probably know a lot of people. Anybody knows a lot of people that has at least some money sitting around doing nothing. The very first deal that I did in my IRA, I only used $550 for a $55,000 loan. And the reason why it was $550, when we drafted the promissory note, I wanted to just make it easy as far as percentages go. So I was a measly 1% investor in this $55,000 loan. But the reason why I wanted to do it so fast is because this investor came to me, had such a hot deal that I just thought it'd be silly not to be a lender on this. It was a property he had found through some estate sale. Somebody inherited it and they didn't even live in the state. So he ended up tracking them down. They knew that the property was out of state, but they just had no interest in it. It sat vacant for 2 years. The property he was able to negotiate to buy it for 25,000 and the rehab was 30. So you can imagine what this house looked like.
Sure.
So we ended up, I ended up pooling together $55,000. My portion was only $550, and all the other IRAs, there were 7 other IRAs involved. They were all non-disqualified to me. That's very, very important because how we structured the deal was a little unique, since I was kind of doing the legwork on the deal. And we had 8 IRAs, mine being one of them, all listed as a lender and all in a first lien position. We just had one promissory note. But since I kind of, spearheaded the deal and nobody else was disqualified to me, and I didn't have any of my other IRAs in there. That's the only reason I could structure it like this. I structured it to where my Roth IRA got the 2 points we charged up front on the 55,000. So at closing, that was paid through closing costs. My Roth IRA put out $550, and 3 days later got $1,100 back to it in cash. Again, not trying to wow you with the dollar amount, but that's a 200% rate of return in 3 days. But what I did is I used my resources and other people's IRAs. Be very cautious on doing this. You can't do it with disqualified people. You wouldn't be allowed. But the main point of that is I was able to scoop up 55,000 by just going around to the people I knew and saying, hey, do you got money that's uninvested? Because uninvested money is making 0%. And I've got this deal that we only have to loan him 55,000. The ARV is 135. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer as far as a lender goes. Worst case happens, we've got the property back, and there's plenty of equity to fall back on. So use your resources, use the different types of accounts that you have here. And if you have to, throw some of your own personal money in there too. The potential clients I spoke to this morning, it was a great call. We went over all of that, how to partner your IRAs together. And if you have to partner your personal money together, but there are always things you want to consider when you pull different buckets of money together. I always urge you guys to consult with an IRA specialist, give me a call, give one of my team a call, and we'll help kind of walk you through that, guide you through that. So Ed, any last comments that you want to give? First of all, thank you. The content was phenomenal, blends in perfectly with the story that I had. And we want to show you as much support as possible because you're just such a great guy, man.
Yeah, no, just for sure, anyone on the call, if they want to reach out and discuss, like Dorothy's question specifically, hey, what scale of capital is available, and do we know people who maybe they could partner with and come together to put capital to work and grow it to a point where maybe they can do their own deals or whatever it happens to be. But definitely would just say, guys, reach out to us specifically on the deal side, and then reach out to Nate and his team about getting the account set up and open and ready to go. I would suggest that those who are thinking about doing this type of lending, that you get the account set up with Nate and his team so that it's ready to go. Nothing worse than like us talking with someone, they have the funds at a different custodian, and then they want to get them moved over and they want to fund the deal. And sometimes we need to move in a different direction from lending because our timing can just be so tight. I mean, the difference of a day or two can often be the difference in us getting a deal or not, especially in today's market.
That's such a good point. So, and I bring this up real quick. It's very easy to set up accounts with Nuview. So if you're not already a client and you'd like to be a client, setting up an account takes literally a day. You just fill out an application. We're actually running a promo right now where we're not charging any application costs for the entire month of June. So you can open as many self-directed accounts as you want. Roth IRAs for you, Roth IRA for spouse. If you've got self-employment income, you can open up SEPs, Simples, 401ks. We've got HSAs, ESAs, and we're not charging application costs on any of that. So you could save a whopping amount of money by setting those up. But to go back to what Ed said, is setting it up is just the first step. The second step is getting it funded. Anything that Nuview has to do on our end, we can do within 24 hours. But if it's relying on Fidelity or Charles Schwab to send their money over via transfer or via rollover, that's a time frame that we can't control. So getting that process started early and getting that account funded will enable you to fire when you see opportunity, or if Ed has opportunity, you're ready to go. You've got that money in your IRA, and all you really have to do is provide us the documentation. If it's a loan to a borrower, we just need a copy of the promissory note, and we can deploy those funds within 24 hours. So that helps not only you get the money deployed, but it helps the borrower, whoever that borrower is, buy that property cash and on you go. So Ed brought up a good point. Get the account set up, but also get them funded. There's one more question, and I'll say probably just take this offline. Ed left you his contact information, but he says, does Ed have any active investments for passive investors? I would say he probably does, knowing how active he is.
Every week is the short answer there.
Every week. So yes.
Nate, I did want to add just one point for folks who are unfamiliar. It is important that when you're having these documents put together, that folks like Nuview help you, stumble over my words a little bit, help you put the forms together, because the language on the forms needs to be very exact. So just make sure that you have a custodian who has resources available to make sure that we're doing the documents in all the right way, because you're not signing these in your personal names.
Awesome. Awesome. Good point. So again, just reminding people, use that promo code June21, or just email us. If you want to get account set up, we'll do it right now for you. If you want, I got sales guys or IRA specialists that'll walk you through the application over the phone. Just shoot us an email, info@nuviewtrust.com. And then here's some of our upcoming events. I'm actually doing a presentation with RIA USA. They're based out of Atlanta. If you're a member of that, I'll be seeing you guys tomorrow evening on that. But we also have some other great topics and great speakers. Next Wednesday, we'll be talking about self-storage. The Wednesday after that, we'll be talking more about passive real estate deals, turnkey real estate deals. And then for those of you who are in the Orlando area, Longwood area, or if you want to come out and visit us from out of state, more the merrier. We're going to be doing our first live event of 2021. We're calling it a night with Nuview. We've rented out the Orlando Science Center. It's going to start at 6 p.m. June 23rd. It'll go till about 8, maybe even 9, depending on how much fun we're going to have. We're going to have food. We're going to have a lot of fun, and you'll get to meet the staff there and myself. So I'm really excited because I'll get to meet Nuview clients for the first time live since I've been here. So fun stuff. Go to our website, go to our our Facebook page. You can register on our website, but follow us. Make sure to follow us, right, Maggie? Right. She made this slide especially for you guys. Where is that? I can't move it. Oh, it's not on there. Well, follow us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and see us next Wednesday. Ed, again, thank you, brother. Thank you for sharing your time. I know you got a busy schedule, and hopefully I'll be out there to see you live, and hopefully you'll be down here to maybe mingle with some of our Nuview clients in one of our next upcoming events where we've got some speakers.
I think we're going to make both those things happen. Thanks again so much.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. See you next Wednesday.